3, 2, 1.
Okay, so the motion is this house will create drug provision centers to provide all adults with unlimited quantities of free heroin and cocaine exclusively for on-site consumption. So I will lay out the common definitions over here for the rest of the debate. So the drug provision center will have medical staff on site at all times. This is for two primary reasons. One, it is to try to prevent the casualties from overdose. Obviously, we don't think we'll be able to save everyone who's overdosing. And the second reason is because we will be incentivizing going to therapy within these provision centers as well, for you to be able to rid yourself of the usage of cocaine and heroin. Um so the definition, the motion itself states that only adults will be allowed in these centers, so let's not forget that. And the third thing that I want to clarify is uh, it's exclusively for on-site consumption. And another aspect to this is if you're currently under the influence of cocaine or heroin, etc., we we will not let you leave this provision center because of various reasons. The primary reason being you will violate many public nuisance norms outside. So the same reason why the government does not allow drunk drivers. That's the same reason why we won't let you leave this site. So after we've established these definitions, I'll tell you
POI.
the five. All right, taken.
So essentially, you're creating isolation wards. If people come in here, they're not allowed to go out.
That's not true. Once you've taken your drugs and once you're done with intoxicating yourself, after the effect is over, you can leave. Moving on. I'll divide our team's primary argument into five main sections. The first section being how drugs destroy lives. Second section being how, in our paradigm, there is quality control. Third section being how drug mafia cartels and violence will go down. Fourth section, the fourth and fifth section will be elaborated by the future speakers as well. So essentially we'll incentivize not using drugs as a minor, as an under 18. And the last argument being people who require the users of these drugs for treatment will get a better space to do that. So regarding the first argument, illegal drugs destroy lives, there's two facets to this. One, they destroy lives economically, and second, they destroy lives socially. So the economic argument here is when drugs are illegal, it is their prices automatically hike up. That is the nature of illegalizing things. When that happens, and even if drugs are expensive already, people, once they have a drug addiction, they spiral into this drug addiction, and then they start spending large and larger sections of their income in drugs, and that actually destroys your life. Whereas we're providing free drugs in this safe space. In this paradigm, you're not actually losing all of your money on these drugs. So the other facet of destroying lives is the social argument of destroying lives. Once you begin intoxicating yourself in cocaine and heroin, etc., you begin abusing many people around you under the influence. You could be a driver under influence. You could be at home performing domestic violence under the influence. You could get charges and be sent away to jail under the because of your substance abuse, and this could destroy your social life as well, because once you're a criminal, once you're an admitted criminal, then it becomes very difficult to find jobs, etc., and places which accept you as you are. So in our paradigm, you won't be a majority of these people won't be in the influence of these drugs, because these drugs are available within these centers and you can't leave them. So you're only in the influence of these drugs within the centers. Uh, yeah, and because our approach changes the perception of these people from criminals to uh, patients per se, patients and victims of drug usage. That changes the perception of the person socially in the employment area as well. So the second argument is quality control. Now, once you purchase your drugs illegally, obviously because the people want to get a stronger high for their price, there's many very dangerous substances mixed in within these drugs as well, and these substances can cause overdose practically like it doesn't become very difficult to overdose in these cases. So what happens in our paradigm is what we're controlling the makeup of the substance itself, so it becomes lesser of a health risk as it was before. It still remains a health risk. That's the nature of heroin and cocaine, but it becomes a lesser of a health risk because the quality is controlled. The third reason, is cartel wars end and die down, and then the drug mafia dies down. This is primarily because currently the landscape of drug cartels is because drugs are illegal. You want to ensure that your entire supply chain is protected and there's no competition, there's violence going on, etc. Once the government opens up these centers, there's an official legal bracket within which drug supply is functioning. So everything within this framework setup will ensure that there's no violence, because that is in fact the nature of legalizing drugs. Once you've legalized drugs, the activity does no longer becomes criminal. So people partaking in it are no longer criminals. They will do lesser things to be classified as criminals, etc. Plus, it's a government system, so obviously. The last two arguments I'll just summarize. One of them being decreasing underage incentivization of drugs. This primarily follows along with the argument that once you've legalized and made this system, the people who are addicted to these drugs, they're no longer treated as criminals. So essentially that decreases the stigma of that, the fact that you'll get a thrill once you begin drugs, and the thrill is primarily what first timers chase. So we'll be reducing that significantly. Yeah, and I'd like to end my opening speech over there. The contents will be continued in the later speeches.
I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for their speech. I'd like to invite the Leader of Opposition, Rajarshi, to begin theirs. Rajarshi, if possible, could you please turn on your camera so that we can spotlight you?
Can you all see me?
Yes, Rajarshi, you're visible. Just give me 1 second.
Okay.
Raghav, can you handle the spotlighting? I'm unable to do it.
Let me see what I can do. Wait, I have to. I think there's an option to like give up spotlight or something for me. Yeah. Exit spotlight. Exit spotlight. Yeah. Can you see Rajarshi now? Can you try to spotlight him?
No, I'm on my phone. It's not giving me that
Okay.
option.
Cool. I'll try to figure this out. But
Can you just pin me and stuff? I don't know how this works.
hey man, you're figuring it out. Yeah. Does pinning change the recording? Oh no, Srijan, can you pin Rajarshi? Because once you pin him, then he'll be in the recording. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, perfect. Okay,
Right.
Leader of Opposition, you can begin your speech when you're ready. Please give a countdown before you begin, and please mention your PY preference as well.
My POS, please stop me in the middle of my speech and ask me my POI. All right. And please begin my countdown in 3, 2, 1, go. The proposition didn't mention the stakeholders, but the one in this condition, in this scenario, are the citizens and the government. Uh, Now, going back to the core issue regarding legalizing heroin and cocaine, be it even in a controlled environment, means that they see a positive in this scenario. However, heroin and cocaine are not medically backed in any way. Even marijuana, which is considered medically positive, is still very limited in the system. Uh, we all know how drugs lead to this short term pleasure. It releases a lot of dopamine. this creates this entire reward system and just messes up with the whole drive of every human who partakes in this pleasure. And this creates a sort of codependency with drugs, which is bound to increase with the ease and access, and also the fact that this is legalized and like has a legislative background which is backed up by the government. This is negative in every possible way. And saying that providing these to adults only is not a positive thing, because the idea of adulthood at 18 is a social construct. Biologically speaking, most people do not completely develop by the time until they're 25 at least. So it's a very, pardon my French, but dumb idea to say that uh, not exactly like not encouraging it, but definitely providing an easy access to this is not positive. 18 to 25 is an age where people have the rebellious streaks, have the freedom to do what they want as they're not under the thumbs of their parents, while also not carrying a lot of responsibility. Now, it's a staple around the world in every country where college kids go into drugs, alcohol in full spree. Now, this will lead to the people of this age between 18 to 25, their prime youth, to get into this because they really have little to lose at the present time, which is going to affect them for for the entirety of their lives. Uh, and not only that, looking at it from a moral perspective, every person grows up with the don't do drugs, drugs are bad, whatever. And it's not like it's some conservative sex is bad thing. This has been medically verified that drugs affect you. It has many harms.
POI.
Heroin. Yes, please.
What does the opposition think about the legalization of tobacco?
Obviously, tobacco also has its negatives, but it also has far fewer uh, consistent, as in the amount, like loads of tobacco is very common in use, and of course it has its issues, but to the extent which tobacco is used, if these drugs said cocaine and heroin was used, there'll be deaths all over the place, which is, so it's not exactly a comparable thing. Now, as going back to the previous point, morally speaking, the government providing drugs with such easy access is bad, because we have learned, rightfully so, how drugs are bad from a young age. Now you take that entire thing away and you put everybody in this box saying that it's all good, go on ahead and do drugs, which will affect them. And I think the government throws pragmatism out of the window in terms of theory, well, and looks at things in only in terms of theory and says that this is positive, when in practice this will actually lead to more deaths. So according to the opposition, it's more akin to supporting controlled murder, and the government is doing it themselves. The aspect of addiction was already brought up, and this is going to lead to a net loss in quality of life, and this loss of focus in these parts of life,
POI.
because yes, please.
So, given that drugs happen on both sides of the house, anyways, what is exclusive about your arguments?
Can you repeat your POI? Sorry.
Yeah, so drugs happen on both sides of the house, anyways. We see people go and buy cocaine and heroin, anyways. So, what is exclusive or unique about your arguments?
I think it's because we are not legalizing them. We are treating them as bad currently, which is how it should be according to the opposition. So we are where the proposition are telling that they want to legalize it and looking at it in positive light. We are going against that flow of the river. So this net loss in quality of life is bound to harm not only individuals but society as a whole, because individuals are the ones who make up the society. Adding to that, or legalizing these drugs are not inexpensive, least of all heroin and cocaine. And when you're creating them in such mass quantities and providing them, be it in a controlled environment, it's going to be very expensive. Now, if the government takes out of their bank, and rather than investing in proper things like infrastructure or poor people or whatever, or just quality life of the entire country or its people, and you are focusing on providing people with vices like drugs, is out of sound. And also, how the proposition mentioned previously, they are not talking about regularizing these things, they're actually controlling these people. This is putting these people in practically wards, saying that they're not allowed to leave these places because of their drug use, is just incorporating in their minds that they are under their control, and while selling this as something which is positive for them. I'll end my speech right now. The rest will be continued by the others.
I'd like to thank Rajarshi for his speech. And now the Deputy Prime Minister is invited to begin his speech. Ainesh is sharing your screen. Srijan, could you please pin Ainesh to your screen?
Yeah, one second. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Ainesh, you're audible.
Okay.
Ainesh, before you begin, just mention your PI preference and just do a small content before you begin.
All right. I'll start in like 15 seconds.
What's your POI preference? Do you want it by a text or by?
Just write in chat. Write in chat. Okay. So yeah, my POI preferences are through chat, and my preferred pronouns are he and him. And I'll start. Okay, hello. I'm the Deputy Prime Minister, and I'll continue the government side of the debate. So, as the Prime Minister had initially spoke about our model, about everything, including how you can't leave the center if you're high. We'll have medical staff on site. We will have police on site, and the money will be coming from the state's medical budget. And so, I believe that the uh, opposition kind of misconstrued some of these arguments. So they had the leader of opposition had spoken about how we're kind of controlling the people, and we're kind of saying that we're controlling the people by keeping them in the center when they were high. However, they have however, like, we can't just leave people who are high and let them go about their lives and do whatever they want, because again, if this is from the state's medical budget, and if this is being controlled by the government, this doesn't mean that we are just going to ignore all drug laws and allow every single thing related to drugs be legal, because of course alcohol is legal, but then driving when you're under the influence is illegal. So if we are the government, we can't just allow people who are under the influence to just go into society, because again, this poses a danger to the general public, and the government also has a obligation to protect citizens who are not involved in these drugs, and as well. So another thing which the opposition ignored was all the arguments about the number of lives which are saved due to issues which currently exist, such as drug crime and drug mafias existing currently. Drug wars cause a lot of death, and many teens are in jail for distribution as well. And there's a lot of gangs and violence which are being caused due to drugs. So we believe, and again, we never said that we never said that it is medical, that our system is medically positive. We never said that drugs, that creating this kind of a unlimited drug provision center will ultimately lead to a medically positive benefit. We are just saying that our system is less of a negative than the current situation. Our system, where people are given access to an unlimited amount of drugs in a controlled location. The leader of opposition also brought up marijuana, which was never in the scope of the debate. And also, the leader of opposition had also spoken about the whole 18 to 25 being a rebellious phase. But sure, if we legalize drugs and allow people to take an unlimited amount of drugs in this controlled space, we believe that there's a less of a thrill of breaking the law and being rebellious. Because again, if people from 18 to 25 are being rebellious and are taking drugs because of this rebellious reason, there's going to be the less of a satisfaction out of breaking the law and being rebellious if they are taking drugs when it's still legal. Because when it is illegal, they get that thrill of, okay, I'm breaking the law, okay, I'm going against society, and I'm doing something which is illegal. So people who are doing drugs for this rebellious reason or have a rebellious factor into taking drugs, probably there'll be a less chance of them actually taking drugs. Also, I'd like to reiterate the points which the Prime Minister spoke about. So first being that illegal drugs economically destroys lives. So in the current situation, drugs are not cheap. And this leads to many people doing illegal things and illegal activities and destroying their economic lives and their families as well, which is another point, which is a major factor in this system where people are allowed to take drugs, an unlimited amount of drugs in these centers. They pose less of a threat to society, and obviously they cause less killings and they pose less of a problem to the general public and general society. And another issue is quality control. So lots of the drugs which are present in the outside world are probably not of the best quality and do pose more significant health risks than high quality drugs, which in a government center, the quality can be controlled. And also, again, drug mafias and cartels and wars will die down or end. And drug wars do cause a lot of deaths, and many teens are in jail due to distribution and drugs distribution, and less people will die due to drugs violence. And again, a few other points are people who actually need the drugs, such as for medical reasons, because there are people who do require things such as cocaine and heroin for medical reasons, such as PTSD or other medical reasons, will make it more accessible, and they won't have this financial issue and financial burden of deciding between, okay, should I take these, should I spend money and potentially be economically unstable, or should I just let my mental health or physical health deteriorate. And also next, since again, I'll try to reiterate the less of a thrill thing. So there'll be less of a thrill of the rule breaking aspect of drugs, as again it we're making drugs legal, and people who are taking drugs because they think that it's kind of cool to break the law or whatever won't get that same thrill out of taking drugs, and they won't take drugs because of these reasons. And again, our last point is they won't be treated as criminals, rather they will be treated as victims. And our last point being how domestic violence and violence due to drug abuse will decrease. This becomes less of a public problem as people are in controlled centers and won't be allowed to go into the general public when they are intoxicated. We're not ignoring drug laws. We're just giving another location for them to take these drugs. And they are in a more controlled environment and safer environment. And it becomes less of a public problem, and and the public won't be affected as much, especially those who are not involved with using drugs. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for their speech. I'd now like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition, Joel, to begin their speech. Joel, please turn on your camera if you're able to. Joel, are you here?
Am I not visible? Okay.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, we can hear you now. Yeah.
My internet might be really shitty, so.
That's all right. That's all right. As long as we can hear you, it's fine. Okay, just mention your POI preference. Take a bit of time if you need it, and give us a countdown before you begin.
My POI preference would preferably be unmute and ask, but after 5 minutes, preferably, because I would not like to be interrupted while I'm going through my core argumentation or rebuttals. But if you feel that there's an absolute necessity, then you can unmute before, but preferably after 5 minutes. By the way, is this 7-minute speech, right? Yeah?
Yeah, this will be 7-minute speeches.
Okay, cool. Just a couple of seconds to go through my notes. And the time was there, okay. Okay. Go ahead in 3, 2, 1. Panel, let's look at the biggest problem on government, right? They try to solve a problem that they create. They say that there's going to be medical staff and therapy and all, because they are the ones who's creating the problem, right? They see the importance of the situation and the problem of the situation that they're creating on their side of the house, right? The second biggest problem on their side is how black markets and illegal systems completely vanish off the face of the earth, right? Something that they couldn't really prove to us, right? They come and say, since they're going to be isolated exposure to these drugs, somehow black markets and illegal systems are going to somehow disappear, right? Let me give you a very simple example to prove why this does not stand to any extent unless they prove some logical reasoning for it, right? What are militaries, right? Militaries are localized areas where individuals are given weapon access and they're allowed to use it only within limited war zones and those kind of areas, right? But black markets are based on these kind of weapon systems that are spread to a much larger system, right? Because the military exists, that doesn't mean black markets for weaponry is going to randomly disappear, right? Something that is an exact parallel to what they create, right? Isolated systems where people are given drugs are somehow going to magically wipe out black markets, which is not the case, right? Something that we can prove is going to be amplified on their side of the house, right? Where we talk about dependency, where we talk about there's this entire cycle of dependence and addiction, and as a consequence, people outside will be dependent on this thing, even through illegal means and stuff, right? Thirdly, they talk about medical reasons, right? And this is why the PM brought up this whole idea of medical marijuana, right? Marijuana itself is acceptable to a very limited extent under extreme supervision, and even that doesn't have enough medical backing, right? Now they come and tell you that cocaine and heroin is somehow going to be medically backed and medically important, but this is something with absolutely no medical backing, right? They tell us that somehow access to heroin or cocaine is somehow going to solve PTSD and stuff, something that has absolutely no proof or something that they tell us without any actual logical reasoning, right? So these are the main arguments that proposition came up with that didn't make any sense on, and that panel need to recognize are problematic, right? So what are the main arguments that we as opposition are going to prove to you? I'll give you 3 main things, right? First, how the cycle of dependency exists. Secondly, tangible harms on society that exist as a consequence of the motion. And thirdly, a shift in the status quo, how societal norms are going to be changed as a consequence of the emotions, and societal norms are necessarily going to be changed with a negative impact, right? Firstly, let's look at how dependency exists, right, on a normal individual. For any normal human being, there exists a cycle of a reward system and drive, right? If a person is going to be rewarded for something that they're going to they're going to continue repeating and trying to get access to this thing again and again. If something gives them a dopamine surge, they're going to try to access this more and more, right? This is the entire principle of addiction, right? So when government comes here and says that, okay, drugs are going to be made much more easily accessible, there's going to be legislation which supports this government, that supports drug access. When the government says that it's societally acceptable for these drugs to be given to individuals, it's going to further feed this loop of addiction, feed this entire vice, right? Something that they just come and tell us that, okay, somehow it's going to be magically solved through therapy. A problem that they create is somehow just going to be magically solved through therapy in a very short period of time. They're going to be led back into society, something that they haven't proved to us at all. Secondly, a cycle of dependency that exists among young adults, right? And this is something that we on opposition need to necessarily focus on, right? Young adults, who's the major focus of who are going to be majorly impacted. Because when young adults have this entire system of peer pressure, when others around them are going to necessarily depend on tell them that, oh, you need, to be cool you need to do these things, to be cool you need to take more of these drugs, and you need to do these things. And also, as a consequence of their comparative less experience when it comes to these things, their lack of maturity when it comes to these things, they're going to be people who are trying to access these drugs, right? Something that doesn't exist on our side because of the lack of accessibility of such harmful drugs like heroin and cocaine, which is on our status quo, is under massive law enforcement, and that can't be easily accessed by any normal individual, something that they give for free to any individual who wants it, right? So when this first a taste of heroin comes in, they're going to fall for the cycle of addiction, right? When we talked about how for a normal individual dependency exists, this whole cycle of a reward system and drive exists, all of these problems are amplified on their side of the house, right? Where young adults are negatively going to be impacted. Thirdly, why dependency is shifted from normal vices that aren't nearly as harmful, like tobacco, like alcohol, like normal cigarettes. These are harmful, but aren't to the extent of that proposition comes and tells us, right? When adults are given equal access to heroin and cocaine as they are given to normal cigarettes, obviously we're going to see that there are going to be tangible harms on society, something that they understand on their side of the house. So now going on to the main existence of tangible harms on society, right? Three main things I want to talk about. Neighborhoods within these isolated communities, the people at these centers, how they're going to be affected, people who give out these drugs and stuff like that, right? When individuals are addicted, when individuals have these vices and they're kept within a restricted space where they're continuously consuming drugs, just because there exists medical facilities, just because there exists therapeutic services nearby, it's not like they're going to keep going there, because that isn't in their best interest, right? According to them, when it's acceptable by the government to consume these drugs, they're going to go back to this addiction. The violence will increase, crime will increase within these isolated areas. People who give out these drugs are going to necessarily be harmed. Civilians are going to be harmed within these isolated areas, right? These are problems that exist on that side of the house. Secondly, dependence doesn't just disappear all of a sudden, right? If they say that someone is cured of their addiction and they let them out, how can they prove and how can they systematically show that dependence disappears, right? Something that they couldn't show to us. Because if a person outside is if a person outside knows that if he goes inside these internment camps, is going to be labeled as a menace to society, is going to be not allowed to leave this area, is going to be under the control of the government, not allowed to leave. All of these problems will make him seek unconventional means to secure these drugs, right? Where he isn't limited by problems such as limitations by the government, right? And this is where black markets, the impact of black markets are amplified, right? Black markets exist on both sides of the house. We accept that. But what is the inherent problem of government, right? They make accessibility, they make the base of people who consume these drugs at a much larger extent, right? Normal civilians who couldn't initially gain access to these drugs are going to be addicted to them, are going to want to consume drugs at a black market level and use illegal means to acquire these drugs. And these are all problems that exist in their house, right? There exists a cost on the state that is financial, and this cost in the state, even on if both sides of the house, if both government and opposition is awash, the cost in the state still exists, right? There is going to be a massive financial cost in the state, and as a consequence, we prove to you how dependency exists. We prove to you how tangible harms exist in this society, and that is why we have wanted this debate.
I'd like to thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for their speech. I'd now like to invite Aadarsh, the government whip, to begin their speech. Aadarsh, if you could please turn on your camera, that'd be great.
Yep. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Give me like 5 seconds.
Okay. Before you begin, Aadarsh, could you please specify your PY preference? And give
PY is, yes, say them out. It's fine. All right. I'll start in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so panel, the discussion that's happened up till now has shown a complete lack of understanding or a lack of clarity in two things: A, the status quo, and B, our model. So in this speech, I'm going to try and clear that up and try and prove to you why we win this debate, right? Okay, so I want to talk about a few of their arguments first, and then I'll sort of show how the teams clashed and why we think we won. So the first thing which came out of Joel's speech, the one before me, he comes and spends a big amount of time on why black market still exists. And we think this is not going to happen at all, for the very simple reason that drugs are free. No person in the right mind is going to set up a black market to sell heroin for 100 rupees when I can literally go and get drugs for free. The entire idea of black markets does not make sense in this debate. So I think that takes out a good chunk of Joel's speech in the first place. Then the next big problem that he identifies is, okay, the people who give out drugs in these camps or in these buildings might get affected, and the people in the nearby vicinity might get affected. So to that we say, first of all, we have police protection there, and in the off chance that there is a escalation, we think that is much less of a harm than the massive massive harm that this has to society. So we don't think it's really going to harm civilians in the, no, thank you. We don't think it's going to harm civilians in the area. And for the people who are giving out the drugs, we think police protection is there. We don't think it's an argument that's going to win in this debate on the comparative, right? So then let me tell you why we win this debate. Firstly, we win this debate on principle, and they never responded to this at all. Ainesh comes and talks to you about like domestic violence victims, about people who die in car crashes because of drug abuse, because of people who die in a significant number of people who die due to like road rage and all of these other things. And we say that the government has an obligation to protect these people, and this is absolutely not responded to. They don't even bring this up in any of their speeches, and we need a response from Mayank as to why it's okay for these people to go through this, and why it's okay for society to bear this burden, and why it's not better for them to be isolated and be kept in a place where they can't actively harm innocent people, where they can't actively go and hurt other people, right? And then we give you an economic argument where we tell you, like, look, the drugs are expensive. And this is touched upon by Rajarshi in his speech as well. So the argument that they give us is that, look, drugs are expensive, and hence the government is going to have to spend a lot of money on buying drugs. To this, we say two things. Firstly, in Raghav's speech, he already explains to you why legalizing it makes it less expensive, because that's just the nature of legalization. A good example he gave you was marijuana, which is a lot less costly now in US after it's been legalized. But secondly, we say we care about people more on an individual level, because people who have gotten stuck in the cycle of addiction, the stuff that Joel talked about, which is definitely true, these people exist on both sides of the house. Drugs exist on both sides of the house. This is a big problem that they don't understand, or that they've refused to acknowledge that exists in the status quo. Heroin and cocaine are not magical substances that don't exist or that people can't achieve. If that was true, we would never have this debate. If no one had access to heroin or cocaine, we wouldn't be having this debate, right? So the fact is that people do have access. No, thank you. People do have access to heroin and cocaine. Sure, maybe not in as much quantity as they will under our side of the house, but there's still a large number of victims who get addicted to these things. So where do they go to buy to get it? They go to the black markets. They go to illegal sources where they charge extremely high amounts of money for these drugs, right? What are the impacts of that? Raghav tells you, first of all, they're going to get destroyed economically, because it's such a powerful biological addiction. Because you can't get out of the cycle, you're forced to keep on selling things. You're forced to allocate larger and larger chunks of your income to go and get more and more drugs. Secondly, because you're addicted, the amount of drugs you need to purchase in the first place is higher, because you need more drugs to like get this level of like higher dopamine release or whatever. So you need to buy more, you need to spend more, and that is extremely harmful for these people. If even in the off case that we're comparing economics of the government versus economics of all the victims who are getting absolutely wrecked, we would definitely say it's more important to protect the victim. We'd rather have them have it for free and not be able to spend as much on something else, rather than all of these people getting destroyed. Right. And then we talk to you about social impacts. And again, we get absolutely no response. We talk to you about how these people are viewed as criminals, how they're put in jail, how young kids across the world are put in jail for drug distribution, and how their lives are completely ruined. We get absolutely no response whatsoever. Then the next thing is we tell you how it's much more safe in this sort of camp than out in the wild, right? Because we talk about quality control. What is our quality control argument? We told you that because of the fact that you need to sell it in a black market, and you want to give the most like amount of dopamine release for as low a price as possible, you're going to mix unsolicited substances. You're going to make these drugs particularly dangerous. You're going to make them harmful for people. You're going to increase the like amount of deaths due to that, or the amount of overdose due to that. And that is something we can control on our side of the house, because all heroin and all cocaine is stored in this government facility. Yeah, Joel, go. Do you have a POI?
You can continue now. He hasn't asked.
Yeah, so then the next thing we tell you, again, we talk about how drug violence and how mafia sort of stuff gets completely reduced. The only response we hear to this was, no, cartels will still exist. But I think we made it pretty clear why cartels don't have any logical reason to exist in this sort of system, right? Because drugs are free. They're not going to gain anything economically from this. So at the point where cartels disappear and this drug mafia disappears, what do we get? We get incredible social impacts. We get tons of people who are not dying in drug-related violence. We get tons of teens who are not no longer involved in drug-related crime, who are not getting stabbed on the streets, who are not getting thrown in prison. We think this is a massive benefit that they have simply not responded to, right? So then, at the end of this debate, what do we get from them? We get the fact that some people might die in the camp because of the amount of drugs that they get, to which we say two things. Firstly, drugs are already very ubiquitous in the status quo. You can get them. You just get, so along with the medical harms that happen in the status quo for heroin and cocaine, you also get additional baggage of economic and social harms. Secondly, we say that we are at least doing something towards the problem by putting you in a place where there is some level of medical assistance or some level of psychological assistance that simply does not exist in the status quo. The idea that drug users are better off in the status quo is simply false, right? And then what else do they tell us? They tell us that
the time will continue.
being rebellious and stuff. And I think Ainesh does a good job of handling that argument by telling you why, when we stop it from being illegal, it's no longer a thrill to like jump over some gate and go to some dark alley and buy it from some unknown figure, but rather you go to a government sanctioned place where there is no longer the thrill of being rebellious and like being like a rebel. That's when you get better like disincentivization for young people. So all in all, what we want to say is our world is a better world for all drug users. Their lives are better economically, socially, and most importantly, the lives of innocent people around them are also made much better. We're very proud to propose. Thank you.
Hey. Am I audible?
Yeah, Mayank, you're audible. I'd like to thank the government whip for their speech, and I'd now like to invite the opposition whip, Mayank, to begin theirs. Mayank, would you be turning on your camera?
Tell me we can see it.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay.
Mayank, before you begin, please mention your POI preference. Take a few seconds if you need it, and then give us a countdown.
The fuck? Okay. So POIs, just put them on the chat. And that is it. Okay, can I start now?
Oh, yeah, you can begin. Just give a 3-second countdown, like 3, 2, 1, and then you can begin.
Sure. I'll start in 3, 2, 1. Panel. Now, when the proposition wants to come and they want to talk about the stakeholders, which are the drug users, obviously, we need to bring up one specific point. The fact that more drug users are being created, which has sort of been our theme, that more drug users are being created and getting easier access, that fact in itself is bad. Now, I don't know if you've seen the movie Purge, but that is a movie where people get to do all crime possible for 24 hours. And the logic of that is to control the lower classes. We feel that this entire model, whether by the intention of the house or not, it's a model that will disproportionately affect the lower classes. The benefits they want to bring up, the flowery benefits, how they can come up for a nice chat, like they go for a stroll in the park and they give like, yo, instead of going to the park today, why not go and do drugs? Like it won't be the same thing, right? There's a massive difference. When they're doing drugs, they can stay there physically till they're not high anymore. But the effects of that, the effects on their family, the effects on the people around them, the effects on the fact that when they normalize doing drugs, more and more people are doing drugs. This is not going away. Your stakeholder, your drug users might be benefiting, but they're the only ones that are benefiting, and you're creating more of them. And even they are benefiting on a very surface level because the drugs which they used to pay for, drugs to get more harmful drugs, instead of that they're getting better drugs. But that doesn't make the drugs harmless, right? That makes the drug, the core harms are still there. The fact remains that when you talk about things like Wall Street or Silicon Valley, where people do massive amounts of drugs, even in those cases, we're talking about mostly financially affluent people. They can do drugs on a controlled manner because they have other dopamine reasons to, just take and go ahead. You have a life. When you talk about the lower classes, they don't have that amount of self-actualization. They need these drugs. It's commonly we seen throughout. This is common knowledge that drugs affect the lower classes more harmful. They're more harmful to the lower classes, and that is exactly what this model is doing. The entire model is creating a feedback loop of addiction among people that are going to be worse affected by it. It's putting government in a form of control, and drugs have been used to control people before. We have the opium wars, which was brought up by the British against China. Drugs are a very useful tool of control, and this kind of thing, even though you're talking about, okay, it will remove the cartel violence. Okay, yes, it will remove the cartel violence to a lot of extent, but the fact remains that the still people going to do drugs, right? When you can have drugs more harmful than these, and people will still do it. drugs exist on our side of the house, but on your side of the house, the drugs are increasing. It's getting more normalized. Those harms cannot be taken away. Those harms exist. When we talk about more people doing drugs, we're talking about lives that is inherently worse. And worst of all, it's now this is tax funded, or this is by the government. You're talking about you're bringing marijuana as a comparison. You're saying that okay, you know what, marijuana is cheaper, which will make this drugs cheaper as well. No, A, marijuana is not still that cheap. B, marijuana is made by private industries and companies which sell marijuana on their own and grow on their own. A government has been historically seen always be very bad at things like these for production. They always tend to buy private contractors. Now, if you bring in private contractors into picture, then this becomes another thing. Then why not just go ahead and partner with cartels? But that's exactly what you're doing. Now we already talk about the big pharma and the big alcohol, big tobacco, which are fields of interest which control the government. Now we have another, bringing another corporate system. Fine, there's no crime. There's no crime being done on the books, but the biggest crime here is being done by the government and by people who are funding them. And that in itself is why we think that this debate is clear enough, right? Now, you can talk about, okay, now this was a very interesting prompt brought up that, okay, it will be less thrilling. That's why usage will go down. Marijuana is legal in a lot of parts of the world. Does that make it less thrilling? Does that mean less people are using it? Because like, oh, you know what? Marijuana is not illegal anymore. I don't want to get high. That is not what happened. Nobody's thinking that. That point makes absolutely no sense. Nobody is doing things because it's just for a thrill. We're not 4-year kids. When people do drugs, they do it for other reasons. They do it because they have nothing going on in their life. They do it because they want a thrill that is easy. They want something that can give them short-term dopamine reward, while the time they can sacrifice their long-term dopamine rewards by fostering relationships or by working on job or by working ambition, because these things are cult. That's the entire point of drugs. That's why people use them. And now when we go back to the other point that when we already have people doing drugs, a lot of people do marijuana for the reason that it's so ubiquitous, right? Marijuana is a plant. You don't need to do anything. A lot of people grow up marijuana. And it's very readily available. That is a reason. That is an undeniable reason why marijuana is used so commonly, why marijuana still doesn't carry the stigma that a lot of other drugs do. Even though we have things like LSD or so, which are, let's say, equally as harmless, but still very difficult to make. Because marijuana is so available and normalized. By doing this, you're making this very available and normalized. People who are doing alcohol or marijuana or tobacco, now they can think about, okay, you know what, why not go and try heroin? They give it free anyway. It's like, it's just a thought that will go in everyone's mind. You're normalizing something to such an extent while you're benefiting a small amount of people on the surface. You're destroying their lives. You're destroying the people around them. You're creating another form of control on the poor people. You're essentially doing another form of purge. But this is all done legally. This is done in the system where people are told that they're benefiting from them, and this is ignoring the fact that this is expensive. This cannot be denied. This is expensive, and because this is a model talking about a government funded model. Now, if this is free, it will be expensive. Those costs are being taken away from schools, from hospitals. Do you think those are not better places to spend this on? By benefiting, are you not even benefiting drug users this way? Something better, a better funding investment would be in drug therapy centers where people come and are given pills and other medicines to wean them off drugs. By doing this, you're just creating drug users. There's absolutely no point to this. It's taking so much cost. It's destroying so many lives. There's absolutely no point to doing something like that at all. And the fact remains that I don't know. No, there's no real reason why the government needs to go to this step, go and make this so free, so useful. It's almost like the government wants him to do drugs. What other reason would be to do that? In a place where we don't have, when we have vaccinations, right? Governments bring in systems like free vaccination, things like that, because they want people to get vaccinated. This is also a form of injection, but it's not the kind of we're looking for. It's not the kind that is benefiting everyone. So why does the government want people to do this? I'll take the POI. Oh wait, yeah, I can take the POI. I think. Can I?
Okay. I don't know if you can. I mean, yeah, Joel literally told us that people do drugs because they feel peer pressure because people tell them it's cool, etc. So who's right out of you both?
You are the right person, sir. When we talk about people who are talking about peer pressure, we talk about normalization. We're talking about the peer pressure is that, dude, this is illegal, let's go and do this, let's do only illegal thing because it's cool. The peer pressure in terms of the fact that you're making it normalized, you're making it ready. The peer pressure would be in terms like these, that, okay, you know what, let's do this drug. Oh, we can do this easily. The government wants us to do this. Why don't you want to do it? That's the kind of peer pressure we're talking about. I have no idea why you think that this boomer logic of people wanting to do drugs because it's illegal stands. I mean, that makes no sense to me. This model on all sides, it is benefiting no one except the government and the corporates. It's benefiting no one and destroying everyone's lives. This model is not good. The goal should be weaning people off drugs. Drugs are bad. Let it stand on that. And that is something that we need to talk about. And the model entirely fails it. That's why we take the debate. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the opposition group for their speech. I'd now like to invite the leader of opposition reply speaker, Joel, to begin their speech. Note to the reply speakers, both of the reply speeches will only be 4 minutes long, and no POIs will be accepted. Joel, whenever you're ready, just give us a countdown, you can begin. Also, Joel, in case you're speaking, you are muted.
Yeah, no, I was just connecting my earphone. Just a second, I have to.
Yep.
Yeah. Am I like clearer now?
Yeah.
We can hear you, we can't see you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Cool. Am I visible?
Perfect.
Cool.
Just give us a countdown and you can begin.
Just a couple of seconds. Okay. Fine. 3, 2, 1, go. Today, the biggest problem with government was the fundamental understanding of how an addiction exists and the dependency that addiction causes, right? Something that that opposition tried to go into through extensive analysis, through extensive understanding of how on a normal individual dependency exists because of their certain drives, how on youth especially this is extremely effective, how there exists a replacement of vices, and all of these are further amplifying this entire system of dependency, right? So government comes and sets up a system where they make drugs extremely accessible, right? So let's ask two questions. Firstly, on an individual level, how is an individual going to be affected, right? Government says that individuals who have an addiction to these certain types of drugs, which are, we need to understand, a very limited group of people, right? This isn't a large group of people that we're talking about, especially since it's only concerning heroin and drugs, not all types of vices or all types of addictions, right? Heroin and cocaine, especially, only these two are covered within the category of the emotion, right? They only resolve the situation for this certain group of people, and even the only means they do this is by isolating them from the rest of society until they achieve nirvana or achieve freedom from this addiction, right? And this is the biggest problem with government, right? The fundamental understanding of how addiction works, right? People take entirety of years to go through rehab, to talk through with their family and friends, to the amount of extreme stress that they put on the people around them, for multiple years of rehab and going to counseling sessions and stuff to go through and leave this addiction of drugs, right? Especially when it comes to such potent drugs like heroin and cocaine. Government comes to us with an extremely unnuanced and ideal world where they say, okay, they'll consume drugs. There are medical facilities nearby. Let's go to these medical facilities and addictions randomly disappear. We send them back to society. They come back again, consume drugs, medical facilities exist. They go back to society. It isn't instantaneous like that, right? If an addiction exists, it is going to persist for a very long time and it isn't going to be solved instantly, right? On an individual level, it is extremely problematic when government tries to solve the problem for a very small group of people, but instead spreads it to a much larger population, right? When all civilians above a certain age is going to be given access. And this is a fundamental problem we see on government, right? In order to solve a problem for a very small group of people, they cause massive harms on a massive large scale, right? So when government doesn't look at this. Secondly, we need to ask the question, what is the effect on society, right? And they tell us that the sole effect on society that they have as a consequence is that illegal systems of drug spreading is removed, right? And again, we need to understand that this debate only covers heroin and cocaine, right? Drug cartels aren't going to suddenly disappear. There are systems of blackmail, the systems of spreading of marijuana, the systems of spreading arms and inciting conflict between minority groups to gain money in extorting communities. All of these things still exist, right? They're not going to magically disappear. Something that they just came to us and said, whoa, they just randomly disappear, right? Something that we again gave a comparative for, that militaries have free access to weapons, but since it is only localized, black markets exist for these very same weapons. And that is the biggest problem of opposition, right? Where we talk about scale, where we talk about how only governments benefit and how the massive amount of civilians who are exposed to these drugs for the very first time in their lives are going to be addicted, something that they don't solve, that they just tell us magically that it's going to disappear because facilities exist. When these tangible harms are seen, and when there are extreme costs on the government themselves to fund such large spread of heroin and cocaine, when there's extreme financial strain on the state to provide these resources, we see that no one benefits, right? The state is going to be failing because the financial costs, individuals are going to be harmed, and overall, government fails to protect any of the main stakeholders of this debate. That is why opposition, that's why this motion falls.
Thank you, Joel, for your speech. Please give me like 15 seconds before we begin the next one. Okay, I'd now like to invite the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister reply speaker, Raghav, to begin their speech. Raghav, you can just give us a countdown. You can begin.
I'm audible, right?
Yeah, we can hear you and we can see you.
All right. Give me like 5 seconds. Yeah. I'll begin in 3, 2, 1. The opposition wants a more complete argument from the proposition on how to remove black markets in general, even the black markets of firearms, while the opposition doesn't propose a model for anything and sticks to the status quo. This inherently in itself should be an instant disqualification of all arguments proposed by the opposition. Moving on, one thing that the proposition and opposition have both agreed upon is that the usage of drugs is bad for the individual. This has been reiterated by side government and side opposition multiple times throughout the debate. Considering this, the opposition still assumes that the government has a secret will to incentivize drug usage, which doesn't make sense because there's multiple hypocrisies in the arguments made by the opposition. The opposition brings up the argument that the usage of drugs begins because of the thrill to defy law. And the short-term dopamine of reward, as quoted by Mayank. When side a government proposes that this will be reduced because we are no longer treating heroin and cocaine users as criminals but rather victims, side opposition says this is not true. Incentivization doesn't happen because of that. Incentivization happens because people are like, that is legal, so do it. Side opposition says that marijuana side just chucked in some sort of fact saying that marijuana usage did not go down after it was legalized without considering actual truth and facts, where in fact marijuana usage went down substantially because it was illegalized. That is just a statistical fact. The opposition continues to misconstrue the proposition's argument about medical help being there within the facility, where the opposition says that they will take in the drugs, they will go to the medical facility, and then they will return to society on a daily basis. This is nowhere near the paradigm that the proposition had set up from within our first speech itself, where the proposition had set up explicitly that people will get to use these drugs and they will be incentivized to go to these medical help if they want to get rid of their addiction, which society will incentivize to do. All right. But it's not going to be some sort of internship camp that you'll be kept within for months and months. That was explicitly stated by the government. Just as you're over your high, you can leave and return to society. The opposition uses the purge as an example. Mediocre public sellout movie The opposition then brings up the argument that the effects on the family will be great, will be large for the drug user, whereas the proposition has explicitly set up our paradigm in such a way that when these people who are intoxicated will never even get a face outside society, and just as their intoxication temporarily is over, they get to return to their jobs, their homes, etc. The opposition says that these camps are bad and good, both in the same speech in all three speeches. The stakeholders within this are simple. There's the victims and then there's society. And within the proposition, the victims are better because they're not losing out on money. They're not being put into jail, and their social reputation is not going away, and there's lesser victims created because there's incentivization of not using drugs now rather than incentivization of using drugs, which was present because drug users were treated as criminals explicitly. Society is better as a paradigm with us because these drug users who get addicted are not free to roam the streets while intoxicated, and that reduces public nuisances, that reduces domestic abuse, etc. And we rest our case here, and I am proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the Prime Minister reply speaker for their speech. The judges will now leave this call and move to the AJ room for 15 minutes, prepare our speeches, and we'll return to this room one at a time to give each of our ad speeches. Thank you both sides for the excellent debate. We'll be back in 15 minutes.
Is still recording?
I started recording, but it takes time for the notification to go. Okay, yeah.
Okay, just tell me when you want to start speaking.
Okay, I'll start in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so we basically had 2-1 dissent in the AJ room, and proposition ends up winning. So yeah, since I have to start, according to me, it was the op, and I'll go speech by speech. The other two, I just thought it was a prop, but I'll go. I'll start with the Prime Minister's speech. So you laid out some stuff which is like having therapy and medical facilities available and police facilities available, and that people can't go outside while they're under the influence of drugs, if I remember correctly. And then he said stuff like that they destroy lives economically, socially. Why they destroyed economically? Because of the illegality and price hikes, which is a valid point, and that you give it for free in a safe space. And the social crimes and violence related to the people who actually take drugs, like their families and the other people involved, I guess. So after that, I guess you tried justifying it by saying that since you're only under the influence inside this particular institution, it's minimizing the effect on other people, which is true, which is a good point. And you said that these people are no longer criminals; they're patients and victims of drug abuse, which was a recurring theme in the entire model that you guys created. Is that they're victims, and I think that was one of the major things that I noticed was that you were treating them as victims essentially, when it is actually a known fact that the reason why most people start using drugs is because, like, for recreational purposes. So treating every single drug user as a victim essentially means that you're conceding to the fact that drugs are bad. But then after that, you brought up the fact that I don't know, I guess they're used for medical purposes as well. And then you said that people can, I guess, alter the chemical composition in the, which is what happens in the drug cartels. And I guess you can control the quality. Again, true, but I don't see how much of a difference that makes. And the main point I guess you brought up was it decreases the stigma which comes with drug usage. I don't understand how that's a good thing, because point number one, drugs are bad. And that is something which I just can't ignore throughout the entirety of this debate. So another thing which he said, which was continued for the rest of the debate as well, was that it decreases it stops the thrill which comes with using drugs because now it's legal. I don't think that's true. So this was something that we discussed and we couldn't come to a conclusion whether it's true or not. But according to me, I think the thrill of using drugs doesn't come from the fact that it's illegal. Like people don't say, hey, drugs are illegal, let's do drugs. People want to do drugs because of what drugs are, like because of the dopamine they release. Because technically they're harmful, they're bad, but they release dopamine. That is where the thrill comes from, and not from the fact that it's illegal. So legalizing it is not going to remove the thrill. So that was your speech. Coming to the leader of opposition, the citizens and governments are the stakeholders, which you established first off in your speech, which was good. And you said that heroin and cocaine are not medically backed in any way. That is a fact, and that was also one of the major reasons why I thought something that the proposition claimed that it's used for medical purposes. That's not true, to my knowledge at least. As far as I know, medical marijuana is a thing, but cocaine and heroin are not used medically in any sense. So I don't really know how you backed up that claim. I don't know what kind of research led to that, but the opposition clearly said that it's not backed up medically, which I think was a major stakeholder in this. And you explained how drugs work, which is the dopamine dependency, and this is going to increase because the government is backing it up. You're creating a feedback loop. That was a good point. And adulthood at 18 is a social construct. Again, kind of debatable. I mean, ironic that I'm saying that, but adulthood coming into the picture is, I don't think it's a very, it's not a very factual point. But yeah, you brought it up. It wasn't backed up by evidence, so I'm not going to consider that properly. The moral factors that you brought up, it's more medical than conservative. Yes, that was true. You brought up the point that the reason drugs are bad are because they're bad for your body. It's not a social construct that drugs are bad. It's a medical fact that drugs are bad, and there's no ignoring that. And I don't think that the proposition at any point considered the fact that yes, drugs are genuinely, there's nothing good coming out of drugs other than the recreational factor. They address the addiction issues and stuff like that, but they didn't address the fact that the main factor here is that drugs are bad and you are increasing the number of drug users. The reason that the proposition kept saying is that yes, the number of drug users are decreasing is because we're making it legal. I don't think that's how it works. Making something legal, something which is bad, making it legal doesn't decrease the number of people that are doing it. And you call, I guess you call it control model, a little bit extreme, but yeah, I guess that's kind of makes sense, but that's a little extreme considering there was no backing up. And you brought up the expensive thing, which is true, which was later backed up by saying this expense could be used for other things. The government will spend, it is a fact that the government will spend a lot of money because the motion says unlimited drugs. Plus, you're saying you will spend on medical facilities, you will spend on police, all of which is there. You will spend on the institution, you'll spend on providing unlimited drugs to unlimited people. You're spending all of that money. How is the government benefiting from this, where all of this money could have been spent somewhere else? I think that's a very strong point. Moving on to the deputy prime minister, I just have one thing to say. You backed up all of the prime minister's points. You rebutted well. There were no new points in your speech. That's literally all I have to say. Technically the deputy prime minister is supposed to bring up new points in their speech. There were no new points in your speech. That's all I have to say. Your speech was good. The points were backed up well. You didn't say anything wrong, but you should have. One good thing that you brought up was that domestic violence and violence due to drug abuse will reduce, but you didn't bring up any new points. The deputy leader of opposition, I guess, brought up a really good point, which was the problems that will exist due to long-term drug usage. Even if you can't leave the institution while you're high, getting addicted to drugs will lead to long problems. Yeah, then moving on to the whips from both the sides, I think the government whip and the opposition whip were both great because you essentially did attack the other teams well. But from the opposition side, I think the whip was better because you kept on bringing up the essential point that the, the government is ignoring the fact that the people you're trying to protect is the society which is affected due to the people who are consuming drugs. But the people who are consuming drugs are a part of society. They are the ones who are suffering. You're treating them as victims, but ultimately they're a part of society. Why is their welfare not being considered? Yeah, I guess that's all. So yeah, that's it. Time has been exceeded, but in case there's any questions.
Will you take questions? Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I have two questions. Actually, one question. You said that peer pressure is not used for that peer pressure is not the reason why people continue to take drugs. But I don't think we made that point. We
No,
made
no,
the point.
that's what I said. I think what I said was illegality is not the reason why people have the thrill of doing drugs.
Yeah, no,
Drugs
no,
are the,
wait. I
yeah,
didn't finish my question.
fine.
What we said was people begin to get into drugs because of the peer pressure, because of illegality, right? The continuing the usage is obviously because of the drug. So, if do you think that that's right?
Okay, so if you're saying that the reason why people start getting into drugs is because of peer pressure and illegality,
Yes.
they're, I don't think they're directly correlated. Okay, so the peer pressure comes from other people who have already done drugs, who think it's cool to do drugs, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so if you're coming from there, then I think the reason why people want, where the peer pressure comes from, I think it's because people who have already done drugs think they're cool. Why? Because the drug, the dopamine, and the harmful side effects. Even though it's bad, I'm doing it. Why? Because dopamine. I'm a cool person. Blah blah blah. But
Okay,
the other thing
so
is that because of the illegality, I don't think that's part of the thrill. Like, yes, it may be part of it, like, breaking the law and such. But I think the major reason for, so the peer pressure comes from people who have already done it, and then the peer pressure gets to you, and then you do it. But I think the major thrill for doing drugs is because they're drugs that release dopamine and they're harmful. So you shouldn't be doing them, but you're doing them.
all
That's
right.
where I think the main thrill comes from.
All right, and second question is not much of a question, it's more of a clarification. I am almost certain that cocaine and heroin are used as anesthetics for treating,
Yeah, that's
as
what I'm saying.
anesthetics, right? So
Yeah, I
Yeah,
they
yeah.
searched
are
on
used
that
in
later. I
medicine.
couldn't find that anywhere.
Yeah, I get. So you didn't provide that in your speech. First of all, you said PTSD, and secondly, okay, even if that's true, let's consider for a second, for the sake of argument, that you mentioned it in your speeches, that they're used as anesthetics, cocaine and heroin. Not that I've heard of, but as far as I know, general anesthesia is used for anesthetics.
Yeah,
Even if
general
cocaine,
anesthesia. Yeah.
yeah, okay, even if
General
cocaine and
anesthesia
heroin
is
are
made
used
up
for,
of morphine, which is the primary
I
content of heroin, right?
I get it. It's not the same thing. Cocaine and heroin are recreational drugs, and morphine is not the same as cocaine and heroin. I'm pretty
Look,
sure about this.
right, then if you're not willing to argue
Okay,
that.
even if you're true, let's say you're right. Okay, so cocaine and heroin are used for anesthetic purposes. Okay, so when someone needs anesthesia, they're going to be in a hospital. They're not going to go to a drug usage center and be like, inject me with cocaine and heroin. That's not how it works. When you need it for anesthesia, that means you're in pain, or like, you genuinely need it for medical purposes. You're not going to go to a drug center. You're going to go to a hospital. And if you actually need it, the hospital is going to get it for you. Except obviously they're going to take money, unless you're trying to turn this into some sort of a medical facility which provides anesthesia for free, which is another gray area, because that's not what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a place where you go and get high. I think that's what the idea was. If you were trying to frame it as some sort of a medical therapy facility where you get drugs only for medical purposes, then you didn't put it up in your model. So I'm not considering that. I'm considering the recreational aspect only, because that is what heroin and cocaine are obviously for. If you wanted it to be only a medical thing, you should have mentioned it, but I didn't consider that. So yeah, I couldn't really consider the medical aspects, because it's not a place where you go lie on a stretcher and they're going to inject you with heroin and cocaine because you need anesthesia. You're going to go there and snort. That's what I think.
Yeah,
So
got it.
yeah, so I couldn't really consider the medical aspects of it much. And even if you do consider them, let's just, people go there for recreational purposes. They're not going there because they need a doctor. So yeah, that's all. Exceeded my time by a lot. I'm really sorry. Okay, so I have to leave now. The next will be coming in. Okay.
Okay. Do I have to? Okay, fine.
You have to.
Can you guys see me?
Yep.
Yep.
One sec. Let me
Yeah.
pin
So
you.
I'll be
Wait.
starting in
Wait,
about
one sec. Let me pin you. Let me pin you.
yeah.
Ah, you can see it now, Raghav, right?
Yeah.
I think can start.
Yeah, okay. So I gave the debate to side proposition, right? And I'll first summarize what are the arguments I got from side prop and what are the arguments I got from side op. And I'll tell you like why I weighed each argument, and then I'll tell you why I weighed each stakeholder on either side, right? So first the arguments that I'm getting from side prop are there are medical staff on this site, so they're taking care of implementation on their side, where they're telling that it's preventing ODing, and then they're going to send it to therapy for like long-term benefits, and so that people who are addicted, they're getting it treated like a disease, and they are slowly coming out of it. And so then they give me two major constructives, right? One is the economic, and the other one is the social constructive that they bring about on the table. One, so even in this, so let's talk about the social constructive, where they're dividing the stakeholder of citizens into two halves. One where the person who is taking, so the people who are taking drugs is in one half, and the other half is that the people around them, or like society around them, and how taking drugs, or how their model is affecting them, right? So so yeah, in each of them, so economic prices, when side prop is giving me about how like drugs are already costly, and then they get even more costly over the time of a few years. So free drugs are awesome and all that. And from the social perspective, they're saying that one, the perception of the people themselves who are taking drugs are moved from criminal to a victim slash patient. So their self-confidence also rises, and even they'll want to come back to the straight path and all that stuff. I'm getting right. So and then they bring about medical causes, where the quality, where they're addressing the quality of drugs that are being produced, and then they're also talking about drug cartels. Now what I got from side op is that so there are short-term pleasure. So what humans work towards is a reward system, right? We there's a short-term pleasure, and even in the long term, it is affecting them in a very negative manner. And I'm getting constructives about rebellious streaks in young adults who are not yet matured enough to understand the problems that drugs cause. And they're also talking about how it is not practical, right? Their side op is also bringing about how it is more death, and like how controlled murder is being supported in their system. So and yeah, so then throughout the three speeches, they bring about in the next speech they bring about how black markets are not really solved, but instead they're amplified in this model, and how the dependency still continues. And they go on about and then they talk about the tangible harms that actually happen, and that actually come forward from the system. So now I'll talk about the stakeholders themselves, right? So let's take the stakeholders as side government, as one of the government, and the two halves of society, like how I thought the prop identify stakeholders was justified enough, right? So when it comes to side government, I'm getting that side government is earning more, earning more, because they are spending on they are saving from drug cartels, they are saving from non-violence, right? Like lesser violence, and they're saving from overcrowding of jails. This was brought about, I think, in the DPM speech, and this was a point that I really liked, and it's in a favor of a general, legalization of drug argument, drug debate. So overcrowding of jails was something that I did not find a rebuttal to in op speeches, right? So that is why I'm more likely to believe that side government or proposition brings about better constructives for the economy part of economic part of this
Next
debate.
question.
Yes.
Regarding economy, right?
Yeah.
Opposition talked about how there would be a massive financial strain on a state,
One
and it
second.
has to. Yeah.
About how you guys will invest in education, and about how you guys will invest in like better causes other than drugs, right? Is that what you're talking about? Because that was one thing that I did.
Yeah, we said that heroin and cocaine costs like massive amounts of financing, along with like financing these isolation wards or whatever. This is going to cost a massive amount of money, right? There can be also
Right.
better reasons. I don't see how
So
it's comparable to like
one
reduced
thing
cost of
that I did
jails.
find in side props argument is that so now it was a way, right? It was like I had to weigh between their thing of saving on medical treatments. So they're saving on medical treatments because they are preventing it by sending them on therapy and then that model implementation of that model, right?
How are
So
they saving on medical this thing if they're paying for the therapy?
right, because they're not spending on treatments, right? So in a general case where people are ODing on drugs, or where people are taking drugs illegally, they have like the government has to spend on medical infrastructure. So they are saving. So it is again a trade-off. So I'm inclined to believe that they are saving on medical infrastructure because of not spending on treatment facilities, and they're saving on drug cartels, and they're saving on overcrowding of jails. And what side opposition has brought about, I think in your speech, or I think in Mayank's speech, what you guys did bring about was about how it would be better, like this money is being spent anyway, but it had to be like, it is better for the cause of society if it is being spent on education. And honestly, I felt like, with the arguments that were given and with the backing of each constructive, I felt more inclined to agree with an economic benefit on side government's house. Okay, right. Yeah, the next one is social, right? And let's break. Yeah, the next one is social, and here I don't agree that. And here, if I had to give the social argument, social perspective of this argument of the stakeholder, then I would have had to give it to side opposition, because they are saying that, yeah, okay, they're bringing about a moral perspective where drugs are bad, and where you're incentivizing young adults to take drugs and all that. So I'm more inclined to give the social perspective of for the stakeholder of government to side opposition. So, but where there was a major why I gave the final result to side proposition is the social argument, where I did not get any sort of engagement of their self perception. Like we are saying, right? So if the society is divided into two halves, one where society is benefited, one where the people are taking drugs, and one where their social circles, right, their neighborhood around them. And side proposition comes and tells me that black market, there is no cause for black market. And this was a rebuttal I really liked to, I think, Joel's analogy of a gun-like system, right, of a weapon-like system, because they say that black markets won't exist because obviously it's free. Why will anyone actually spend money in selling drugs when it is actually free, right? So from a basic understanding of capitalism, what I understand is that there is no black market. And in their house, the civilians, the other innocent civilians who are not taking drugs, or who are not involved in this activity, are safe, because they again gave me an analogy to drinking and under influence and stuff like that. And so I am more inclined to believe that society and the social perspective of this entire argument goes to side proposition, and that is why I gave them the debate. That is why I overall gave them the debate. Yeah. Any questions?
Yeah, I don't think there's any from prop. Yeah.
Can I like ask after the debate, like everything's done? Like, because even
Sure.
Abhijeeth has debate, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure,
yeah.
sure. Personal feedback, yeah? Yeah, cool.
No, not personal, like just
Oh,
stuff.
okay, fine. For the sake
Yeah,
of
yeah, sure.
timekeeping, sure, cool. All right, just call Abhijeeth, yeah.
Yeah.
Hello. Okay, just
Just
give me
pin in, yeah?
1 second.
Yeah, wait, I need him to turn his camera on so that I can.
No,
IP is on. What are you talking about? Hello. Is it
it's
not
not on
visible?
yet.
It's
Just
not
give it a
on
minute.
live.
Oh, yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
yeah,
there we
it's
go.
on.
Hello.
Damn, okay, suddenly you get such good lighting.
Yeah,
Abhi, why
I,
have you reversed
I
puberty?
I turned myself around and I turned on the light.
Start out कर लो.
Okay, just Ainesh, hide the chat, yeah?
Yeah.
Before he starts.
Oh, sorry. Just tell me when you want to start.
You do the 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't restart.
Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so firstly, so the way I'll structure my ad speech is I'll first go over the constructives I got from each of the sides, and then I'll move on to the clashes that I saw in the debate, and then I'll give some other comments and my overall reason for the verdict. So if it like I'm sure Meghna mentioned this, my verdict for the debate is that government wins and by a decent margin. So firstly, the constructives that I get from the government. The five main constructives I get from the government are that society will be safer in their model, the drug users will be like physically safer in their model, the drug users will have more economic stability, the drug users will have a social benefit in the form of the social stigma, and overall violence in society decreases. These are the five main constructives I get from side government. From side opposition, I get five main constructives that are like four main constructives and one major rebuttal, I suppose. The first one is that the money being spent on these drugs is better used elsewhere in the form of education and infrastructure. Second, that the government's model leads to a direct increase in addiction, which is bad. Third, that the government model harms young adults specifically and ruins their future. And fourth, that the government model is manipulative on addicts. So, firstly, I'll go over the clashes and I'll come back to these constructives later if it's necessary. So, essentially, in this debate, there were three main clashes. Unfortunately, a lot of the points in this debate went completely unrebutted. But the three main clashes that, like the three core clashes debate, were the thrill clash or the underage drug consumption. Second, the clash related to black markets. Third, the clash related to the medical effects and benefits of these drugs. So starting off with the underage consumption, this for me was a tie. So essentially, the entire debate on thrills from side government, all I got was that this thrill will reduce for underage people because essentially it will reduce for underage and people of age because now it's obviously legalized and thus the thrill of committing a quote unquote illegal act is gone. So that's essentially the main constructive I get from side government uses this to argue for both underage and young adult drug consumers. From side opposition, what I get is that now the peer pressure to do drugs will change form, but still remain, and it'll essentially be now of the form that, hey, it's drugs are legal, so why not do them in the first place? And essentially, for me, this as a whole seemed like a tie. It essentially seemed that the government's model would have no difference to the status quo. So these are two models I'm comparing: the model that the government proposes and the model that the opposition defends with the status quo. So I'm comparing these two models. So essentially, for this clash, it seems like a tie. I don't see any particular change in the thrill related to taking drugs, and I don't. And essentially, based on the argumentation, I don't see any side clearly winning because there was no direct comparative as to why the change in the peer pressure narrative combats the quote unquote thrill of doing an illegal activity. Moving on to the black markets argument. So the black markets argument for me went to government. So essentially, the reasoning for this is so I get two main lines of argumentation from each side for this. So one from each side, obviously. The side from opposition is essentially directly claiming that Gov has not spoken about black markets, and as we can see, there is black market for arms. Even though armies and militaries exist where you can use arms, people still use them in like real life. And the argumentation I get from government is that essentially, since we're providing these drugs for free, there is no sustainable version of a black market where people could actually charge money for it and give out drugs, and hence it simply doesn't like the black market simply cannot exist at all. And this line of argumentation went to the government, obviously, because A, the argumentation is more solid, B, the analogy drawn to armies by the opposition side, for me at least, felt very unstable and not exactly directly related. Uh, Armies versus a free institution where you get drugs are definitely not the same thing in any way. And obviously, arms, even if they are legalized, are still something you have to pay for. And black markets for illegal arms and all still will exist. In this case, at least with these specific drugs, the black markets will cease to exist. The argument that there will be other black markets vaguely relating to drugs existing does still stand, and I would have liked to see a rebuttal to that from government side, but we didn't get that. But overall, the clash was to government. Coming to the medical aspect of these drugs, this clash went to the opposition. Essentially, the argumentation I get from government is that these drugs have certain medical benefits in the form of treating PTSD, is what they claimed. There was no backing at all for this, and the claim also seemed unreasonable, which was called out by the opposition. And the opposition also extensively says that drugs are directly bad for your health, especially things like cocaine and heroin. And thus, from the medical aspect, it went clearly by a landslide to the opposition. Apart from this, one thing that was I was sad to see in opposition was essentially the new constructions in opposition whip. These would have been pretty helpful for the rest of the debate, but they came out opposition whip, and I couldn't consider them at full strength. Things like the government eventually outsourcing the production of these drugs and all, and how that's something that essentially won't work. Obviously, it would need more validation as given in the whip speech, but it could have possibly helped your case. And lastly, the disproportionate effect on the lower classes. So while the manipulative effect on addicts was mentioned, and it was taken from the aspect that these addicts will be kept in these centers for months on end, and the idea that they'll be kept until the quote unquote addiction ends is the source of origin for that argument, and that was not in line with what Raghav and the rest of the government team proposed. So it is very hard to weigh that argument. And apart from that, the lower classes argument came out in the government whip speech and did not, sorry, in the opposition whip speech, and did not get enough credit, and I was not able to give it enough credit. So the overall reason for my verdict, and like even if you've seen like the clashes were fairly tight overall, but the main reason for my verdict is because there were way too many constructives from side government that went untouched at all. So the fact that the uninvolved members of society will be safer is something that went untouched completely. The medical safety of the people abusing drugs because they're medical staff on site, and the ability to save them from overdosing, that went untouched. The economic stability of the people using drugs went untouched completely. That went by landslide to uh, the government. There was slight argumentation on the social stigma surrounding drug users, but that still went to government. And the violence decrease. This was something that was that people did try to argue that drug cartels still exist just in different fields. Uh, it was there, so it did weaken the argument slightly, but it still went to the government. Yeah, so on that note, I'm open to any questions. Any questions from side government to opposition?
No, I don't think there's any questions from government.
Opposition? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Thank you both teams for this debate. It was a very interesting debate to watch. Unfortunately, there obviously were some arguments that went ignored, and it would have been fun to see them being countered, but all in all, it was a good debate. Thank you.
Thank you, and that is a wrap. I'm gonna stop recording now.
Like and subscribe. Hurry.
It's not going on YouTube. This is going on stream. Can you subscribe on stream?
What's the
No.
point of putting it on stream? I thought you were gonna upload it.